Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're looking at history, but we're going to flip the script a bit. Usually when we talk about 19th century colonial history, we just see timelines, religious expansion, imperial dates. But if you really pull back, the history of the London Missionary Society, or the LMS in India, it is literally a masterclass in organizational change. We're going to see how a completely foreign entity walked into a highly rigid market, disrupted the entire societal structure, scaled exponentially, and then pulled off the ultimate organizational exit strategy. So move over Silicon Valley, we are heading to 19th century India.
Now, to do this right, we need a solid foundation. Our textbook for today's explainer is Dr. Santha Kumari Jetty's incredible sociological study. Her work meticulously details the intersection of Christian missions and the depressed castes of India from 1850 to 1950. And we're going to use her rigorous academic research to basically reverse engineer exactly how this massive structural transformation happened on the ground.
Okay, here's our roadmap. We'll start with market entry and localization, then look at disrupting the status quo. After that, we'll hit tipping points and backlash, get into the mechanics of scaling, and finally look at the ultimate handover. Let's get right into it.
First up, market entry and localization, the pioneers.
I want you to think of these early missionaries not just as religious figures, but as founders trying to crack a totally foreign, super resistant market. They needed a foothold, right? The LMS came in around 1795, and essentially they were subsidized by the East India Company. Think of the company as their early angel investors. That crucial early funding let them secure core coastal hubs like Visakhapatnam, setting up this hub-and-spoke model to eventually push inland into the ceded districts and Nizam's provinces. But here's the thing, just having a physical location is never enough. To actually succeed, you need product-market fit. And achieving that fit, it took some serious, methodical R&D. Step one was language acquisition. I mean, they couldn't just speak their own language, they had to master spoken Telugu just to get a foot in the door. Step two, native collaboration. They brought in local scholars to act as these crucial cultural bridges. Then, step three, firing up the printing press to mass produce these newly localized materials and really scale their message. And finally, step four, revision and perfection. They were constantly iterating on their text for the audience. It was a brilliantly calculated localization strategy. But as you can imagine, early collaboration in a market this rigid creates intense friction. Take Anand, for example. He was a Maratha convert from the strict Brahmin caste, and he became the absolute linguistic anchor for these complex translations. But the cost of user adoption for early adopters like him, astronomically high. By helping this foreign organization, he faced severe persecution and total rejection from his castmates. It really highlights the immense social gravity and the massive churn risk that those very first collaborators had to face. Moving right along to part two, disrupting the status quo, the builders. By the 1830s, the organization had survived its really fragile entry phase, and the builders took the wheel. They shifted from abstract translation to hard, physical infrastructure. They actually started building spaces specifically designed to systematically enforce their new organizational culture. We're talking about linking printing presses directly to free educational foundations and dedicated girls' schools. They built massive facilities too, like the first Protestant chapel in 1836, which held 300 people and had 150 pupil Sunday school attached. So the strategy completely pivoted from just spreading ideas to building actual institutions. Now, what's really interesting is the social reality inside those new spaces. It was absolutely shocking for the time. Classroom observers literally wrote, Brahmin and the pariah have been seen in close fellowship, aiding each other in the preparation of their tasks. You have to remember, in the context of early 19th century colonial Andhra, segregation wasn't just common, it was the absolute societal norm. So this was a massive disruption. These LMS classrooms were functioning as unprecedented equalizing spaces, forcing daily interactions that completely shattered the rigid hierarchy. Which brings us to part three, tipping points and backlash. The 1847 resistance. Whenever an organization dramatically alters the status quo like that, intense market resistance is basically guaranteed. You just cannot disrupt a rigid hierarchy without severe pushback. And in 1847, that resistance totally boiled over. A massive wave of violence erupted from caste Hindus who were forcefully resisting these social disruptions. And this wasn't some minor protest. The disturbance got to such a fever pitch that colonial military forces actually had to be deployed just to suppress the violence and protect the mission grounds. The structural integrity of the entire organization was under a full-scale attack. And the specific trigger for that violent uprising? It was the conversion of a very prominent local individual named Pulapaka Jagannatham. But the really crucial takeaway here is how the organization absorbed this massive shock. Jagannatham didn't run from the pressure, he weathered the backlash. He went from being the absolute focal point of societal tension to becoming a teacher, and eventually a highly renowned Telugu Christian lyricist. He transcended his controversial start and permanently embedded the movement's new faith right into native linguistic and musical culture. So the very catalyst of the riots ended up becoming a cornerstone of their permanent cultural legacy. Pretty wild, right?
Okay, let's look at part 4, the mechanics of scaling, the expansionists.
With the backlash weathered and the culture finally taking local root, the organization shifted from linear growth to exponential, demographic scaling. And surprisingly, it all traces back to a totally serendipitous micro-interaction in 1838. Inside a local Kadapa jail, an Anglo-Indian civil servant named William Howell bumped into a Tuku Nansharu. Nansharu was a mala thread seller from a deeply marginalized social tier. After he was released, Nansharu invited Howell to preach in his village. It was a single, seemingly minor invitation, but it became the absolute spark for viral growth. You can actually map the exact mechanics of this viral scaling. What starts in 1838 as the individual, just that single jail encounter, radiates outward. By 1858, it scales to the village, with substantial progress and mass conversions popping up in specific mala villages. Fast forward to the 1880s and 90s, and this domino effect creates a massive demographic shift. The movement triggered unexpected mass conversions among low-caste Sudras, which eventually even exceeded outcast numbers. One single, highly localized connection scaled into the sweeping regional transformation.
And that takes us to our final section, the ultimate handover, the shift of agency. So, if you build an organization this massive, how do you successfully exit? Just look at this fascinating contrast from 1911. On one hand, facing ill health and internal transfers, the original LMS founders effectively liquidated their colonial presence. They literally sold off their vast physical undertakings, the chapels, the schools, the bungalows, for just 40,000 rupees. Their physical departure was complete. But on the other hand, the mission itself didn't collapse at all. Continuity was completely unhindered. Why? Because the agency had entirely shifted. It was now sustained totally by the high quality and sheer dedication of indigenous native workers.
This whole journey weaves just an incredible legacy. What started with East India Company subsidies and foreign linguists who literally needed military protection evolved into a completely self-sustaining native movement. An endeavor sparked by a humble mala seller of thread in a jail cell ultimately wove the marginalized castes of colonial Andhra into a flourishing community that totally outlasted its foreign founders. Honestly, it's a perfect testament to achieving true, deeply rooted organizational permanence.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought. When we look at corporate succession planning, NGO development, or, scaling startups today, the ultimate goal is always lasting impact without founder dependency. So how can modern leaders learn from this 19th century model? How do you engineer a total self-sustaining handover where your physical presence is no longer needed for the culture and the mission to thrive? It's definitely a fascinating question to consider for your own organizational challenges. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.